Hey viewers, before we dive into the story, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had a moment where your greatest joy was turned into your deepest shame by someone you trusted? If you have, hit that like button and subscribe, because you're not alone. Now let's get into it. NTHE. First thing I remember wasn't the sterile smell of the hospital or the gentle hum of the machines keeping my 9 daughters alive. It was the cold. A bone-deep, soul-shattering cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the coldness in my husband's eyes as he stood over me, his face a mask of pure, undiluted disgust. I had just endured 36 hours of labor, a high-risk delivery that doctors called a medical miracle. 9 heartbeats. 9 tiny, perfect girls, each one a testament to a love I thought we shared. But as I lay there, my body trembling with exhaustion and a fierce, primal love for the children I had yet to hold, his words cut through the air like shards of glass. 9? He hissed, his voice low and venomous, a sound I had never heard from him before. You gave me 9 of them? 9 more burdens? And I tried to push myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. I wanted to see them. I needed to see them. The nurses had whisked them away to the neonatal intensive care unit, their tiny forms wrapped in pink blankets, their cries, a symphony that my heart recognized even if my eyes hadn't seen them yet. They're our daughters, Mark, I whispered, my voice cracking. They're miracles. And H.E. laughed, a short, ugly sound that held no humor. It was the sound of something breaking. Miracles? Sarah, they're curses. Each one is a nail in my coffin. Do you have any idea what this means? The cost? The shame? Everyone was expecting a son. 1 son. That's all I asked for. And you give me this freak show. NHI's words struck me harder than any physical blow. Freak show. He was talking about our children. My body, which had just performed a feat of nature, felt like a failure. The joy that had been bubbling inside me, the sheer wonder of creating 9 lives, curdled into a thick, suffocating dread. I looked past him, toward the hallway where they had taken my babies, my arms aching with an emptiness that was more painful than the aftermath of childbirth. I wanted to scream, to rage, to tell him that he was the curse, not them. But I was trapped in a body that had given everything it had, leaving me with nothing to fight back with. Then, he did something that would forever sever the last thread of love I had for him. He grabbed the thin hospital blanket covering me and yanked it away. The cold air hit my exposed skin, but it was his next action that froze my soul. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "Get up," he ordered, his voice devoid of any warmth, any compassion. "We're leaving," and nurse rushed in, her eyes wide with alarm. "Sir, you can't do that. She's just given birth. She needs to recover. Her babies are in the NICU. They need their mother." Mark didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on me, burning with a cold fire. "She is my wife. She is coming with me. Her babies are her problem, not mine." He started to pull me, dragging my weakened body toward the edge of the bed. My bare feet hit the cold linoleum floor, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. I stumbled, my legs refusing to hold my weight. The world tilted, the bright hospital lights blurring into streaks. I could hear the nurse shouting, other voices joining in, a flurry of motion around us. But all I could feel was his hand on my arm, pulling me, dragging me out of the room, away from the sound of my daughters' cries. He was dragging me out of the hospital like a piece of trash he was discarding, and in that moment, I understood. My blessings, my 9 perfect daughters, had become the reason for my ultimate humiliation, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this was not just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a war. Section 2, The Facade of a Perfect Life, NTO, understand how a man could drag his wife from a hospital bed just hours after she gave birth to his 9 children. You have to understand the man I thought I married. Mark wasn't always a monster. Or perhaps he was, and I was just too blinded by love to see it. We met in college, a classic story. He was the charming, ambitious business major, with a smile that could light up a room and a confidence that was magnetic. I was the quiet art student, more comfortable with a paintbrush than with people. He made me feel seen. He pursued me with a single-minded determination that I mistook for devotion. He told me I was his anchor, the calm in his storm, the one person who understood his drive to build an empire. Our wedding was a grand affair, funded by his family's old money. They were pillars of the community, their names synonymous with success and respectability. I, on the other hand, came from a humble background. My parents were teachers who valued kindness and integrity over wealth. They were wary of Mark. My father, a man of few words, took me aside before I walked down the aisle. "A house built on a weak foundation will crumble in the first storm, Sarah," he had said. I dismissed his concerns as the overprotective worries of a loving father. I was standing on the precipice of a fairy tale, and I refused to look down. First few years of our marriage were a blur of social events, lavish vacations, and the construction of our dream home, a sprawling mansion that felt more like a museum than a place to live. Mark was obsessed with appearances. Our life had to be perfect, our marriage flawless, our future legacy secured. And for him, that legacy hinged on one thing: a son. An heir to inherit the empire he was so meticulously building. Pressure for a son started subtly. It was in the offhand comments about his business partners, sons, the way his eyes would linger on families with little boys at the park. When we started trying for a baby, it became an obsession. Every month that passed without a positive pregnancy test, the tension in our house grew thicker. He started blaming me, suggesting I get tested, his tone implying that I was somehow deficient, that my body was failing in its one true purpose. When I finally did get pregnant, his joy was overwhelming, but it was conditional. "It has to be a boy, Sarah," he'd say, his hand on my still flat stomach. "Our firstborn has to be a son. It's crucial for the business, for the family name." I prayed with him, not because I cared about the gender, but because I wanted to see him happy. I wanted the loving, charming man I had fallen for to return. Day of the first ultrasound was a turning point. The doctor, a kind woman with gentle eyes, moved the probe over my belly. "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Collins," she said with a smile, "it looks like you're in for quite a surprise. There isn't just one heartbeat. Or two, or even three." She paused, her eyes twinkling. "I'm counting 9. Room fell silent. 9. The word echoed in my head, a number so immense, so impossible, that I couldn't comprehend it. I looked at Mark, expecting to see shock, awe, maybe even a little fear. But what I saw was a flicker of something dark in his eyes. A flash of cold, calculating anger. He forced a smile for the doctor, asked the right questions about the risks, but on the car ride home, the silence was deafening. Night, he didn't touch me. He sat in his study, the door closed, for hours. When he finally came to bed, he stood over me in the darkness and said, "You have to get rid of them. Some of them. All of them. This is not what I signed up for. This is a circus." And I felt the blood drain from my face. Get rid of them? Mark, they're our children. They're alive. They have heartbeats. They are a liability, he snapped. 9 mouths to feed, 9 futures to secure. And what if they're all girls? What then? My legacy becomes a joke. NTHAT was the first time I saw the real Mark, the man who saw children not as blessings, but as assets or liabilities. The man who valued his reputation over human life. I refused. I told him I would carry every single one of them and I would love them, with or without him. He stormed out, and for the rest of my pregnancy, he treated me like a stranger living in his house. He was polite in front of others, playing the role of the concerned husband dealing with a high-risk pregnancy, but behind closed doors, there was only a chilling indifference. He never touched my belly again. He never asked about the babies. He was waiting to see if my body would produce the one thing he valued, NTHE day I went into labor. He drove me to the hospital with the same detached air of a chauffeur. He sat in the waiting room, scrolling through his phone, while I endured the most grueling hours of my life. And when the doctor finally came out, exhausted but triumphant, and announced, "Congratulations, Mr. Collins. You have 9 healthy, beautiful baby girls." The facade shattered completely. The mask of the perfect husband fell away, revealing the monster beneath. And that monster was the one who dragged me from my bed, leaving our 9 daughters motherless in the NICU, simply because they were not the sons he had demanded. The gathering storm. The hallway of the hospital was a blur of white walls and concerned faces. I was a spectacle. A woman in a flimsy hospital gown, barefoot, being dragged by a man whose face was contorted with a rage so pure it was terrifying. Nurses and orderlies tried to intervene, their voices a chaotic symphony of, "Sir, you can't do this," and "Someone call security." But Mark was a man possessed, fueled by a sense of entitlement so profound that he believed the rules of common decency, of human compassion, did not apply to him. NHE shoved me into the back of his luxury sedan, the leather seats cold against my bare skin. He slammed the door, and the sound echoed the final closing of a chapter in my life. The drive home was silent. I stared out the window, my body aching, my heart a hollow cavern of grief and shock. I was a mother to 9 children I hadn't even held. They were alone, fighting for their lives in plastic boxes, and their father had ripped me away from them because they were the wrong gender. When we arrived at our cold, empty mansion, he didn't help me out of the car. He walked inside without a backward glance. I stumbled out, my legs shaking, and made my way into the house that had once been my dream and was now my prison. He was in the living room pouring himself a drink, his back to me. "You will not speak of this to anyone," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "As far as anyone is concerned, you had a difficult birth and needed to come home to recover. The babies are being cared for." That's the story. "Do you understand?" I didn't answer. I was looking at the grand staircase, at the portraits of his ancestors lining the walls, all of them men who had built this legacy of wealth and power. I saw it all so clearly now. I wasn't a wife to him. I was a broodmare, a vessel he had acquired to produce an heir. And I had failed. In FOR, the next few days, I was a prisoner in my own home. He took my phone, my car keys, my wallet. He instructed the staff, the cook, the housekeeper, the gardener, all people who had once been kind to me but were now loyal to the man who signed their paychecks, not to let me leave. I was isolated, cut off from the world, and most importantly, from my children. NMY only window to them was a single, grudging phone call he allowed me to have with the head nurse at the NICU each evening. He would stand over me, listening to every word, as I desperately asked for updates. Baby A is stable. Baby F had a slight breathing issue, but she's stronger now. They all have your eyes, Mrs. Collins. Each piece of information was a lifeline and a torment. They were real, they were fighting, and they were alone. And during those days of confinement, the shock began to wear off, replaced by a slow-burning rage. It started as a spark in the pit of my stomach and grew with every passing hour, fanned by his cruelty and my powerlessness. I would lie in bed, the phantom weight of 9 babies in my arms, and I would plan. The charming, compliant Sarah he had married was gone, dragged out of that hospital, along with her dignity. In her place, a different woman was being forged, a woman fueled by a mother's protective fury. And I knew I couldn't fight him head-on. He had all the power, all the resources. He could crush me without a second thought. So I had to be smarter. I had to play his game. I had to become the person he expected me to be, just long enough to gather my strength and my evidence. NMY Chance came a week after the birth. He came into the bedroom, his demeanor slightly softened. He had been getting calls from family, from business associates, asking about the babies. The pressure of maintaining his public image was getting to him. "The hospital needs you to sign some papers," he said, avoiding my eyes, "and it would look better if you visited them. People are starting to talk. And it was a calculated move on his part, a performance for the outside world. But for me, it was an opening. "Of course, Mark," I said, my voice soft and submissive, a tone I hadn't used in years. "I've been so worried. I just want to see them." NTHE's surprise on his face was visible. He had expected a fight, tears, accusations. My compliance disarmed him. He thought he had broken me. He thought I had finally accepted my place. He had no idea that I wasn't broken. I was sharpening myself into a weapon, and the first thing I would do with my newfound freedom was not just see my daughters. It was to start building the army that would help me save them. The drive to the hospital was different this time. I wasn't a victim being dragged away. I was a general heading to the front lines. The war had begun, and he had just handed me my first victory. The Secret Alliance NTHE moment I walked into the NICU, the world outside fell away. The beeping machines, the hushed voices of the nurses, the sterile scent, it all faded into the background. All I could see were 9 tiny incubators arranged in a semicircle, a constellation of my own making. My daughters. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. I moved from one to the next, pressing my hand against the cold plastic, whispering their names, names I had chosen in secret during my lonely pregnancy. Ava, Bella, Chloe, Daisy, Ella, Fiona, Grace, Hazel, and Isla. And a nurse, the same one who had tried to stop Mark from dragging me away, approached me. Her name was Mary, and her eyes were filled with a mixture of pity and respect. "They've been waiting for you," she said softly. "They're fighters, every single one of them." Mark stood by the door, impatient, his presence a dark cloud in this sacred space. He cleared his throat, a signal that my time was limited. I knew I had to act fast. I looked at Mary, my eyes pleading. "Can I hold one?" I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. Mary nodded, her expression firming as she glanced at Mark. "Of course you can. You're their mother." She carefully opened one of the incubators and lifted out the tiniest of my girls, Grace, and placed her in my arms. NTHE moment, her small, warm body settled against my chest. Something inside me clicked into place. The rage, the grief, the fear, it all coalesced into a single, unshakable purpose. This tiny, fragile being and her 8 sisters were my reason for everything. I would burn the world down to keep them safe. And as I held Grace, I looked directly at Mary. I didn't have to say the words. She saw the desperation, the silent plea in my eyes. While Mark was distracted by a phone call, his back turned to us, I spoke in a low, urgent whisper. "He won't let me stay. He's controlling everything. I have no phone, no money. I need help." Mary's gaze didn't waver. She had seen this before. The subtle signs of coercive control, the fear in a new mother's eyes. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "There are resources," she whispered back. "Organizations that can help. When you come back tomorrow, I'll have a number for you. Memorize it. Don't write it down." NTHAT Small Exchange was a lifeline. It was the first crack of light in my dark prison. I had an ally, and over the next few weeks, my visits to the NICU became my salvation and my secret mission. Mark allowed them because it maintained his public image as a doting, if overwhelmed, new father. He would drop me off, wait in the car or the hospital cafeteria, giving me a strict time limit. He thought I was merely bonding with the babies. He had no idea I was building a network. Mary was true to her word. She slipped me a piece of paper with a phone number for a domestic violence shelter that specialized in complex cases involving wealthy, powerful abusers. I memorized it instantly, my mind chanting the digits like a mantra. During my visits, I used the hospital's payphone, my hands trembling as I fed coins into the slot to make the most important call of my life. NTHE woman on the other end, a lawyer named Jessica, listened patiently as I recounted my story in hushed, frantic tones. She didn't sound shocked. She sounded prepared. "Mr. Collins is a powerful man, Sarah," she said, her voice calm and steady, a balm to my frayed nerves. "We can't just run. We need a strategy. We need evidence, financial records, proof of his abuse, witnesses. Can you get any of that?" NTHE challenge seemed insurmountable. I was a prisoner in my own home, but Jessica's words gave me a focus. My mission was no longer just to survive. It was to gather intelligence. I became a spy in my own life. I started paying attention to the mail, memorizing the names of banks and investment firms on the envelopes. I feigned interest in Mark's work, asking innocent questions about his business deals, piecing together a map of his financial empire from the scraps of information he'd let slip. NMY's biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The housekeeper, a quiet woman named Rosa, whom Mark treated with disdain, had always been kind to me. One afternoon, while Mark was out, I found her crying in the kitchen. Her son was sick, and she couldn't afford the medical bills. Without a second thought, I went to my jewelry box and gave her a pair of diamond earrings Mark had given me for our anniversary. "Sell these," I told her. "Please, take care of your son." Rosa looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. From that day on, her loyalty shifted. She became my eyes and ears in the house. She would tell me when Mark was planning to be out for long stretches. She would leave the door to his study unlocked. She even managed to retrieve my old, discarded laptop from a storage closet, a device Mark had forgotten about. With Rosa's help, I began my secret work. Late at night, while the house was silent, I would creep into his study. Using the fragments of information I had gathered, I started searching for his hidden accounts, his offshore investments. It was a slow, painstaking process. I was terrified of being caught, the fear, a constant, metallic taste in my mouth. But every time my courage wavered, I would close my eyes and picture my 9 daughters, their tiny faces, their fighting spirits. They were my fuel. They were my reason. And for them, I would risk everything. I was no longer just a mother. I was a strategist, an investigator, a woman building a case against her own husband from within the walls of her gilded cage. The ticking clock NTHE day, my daughters were finally discharged from the hospital, was both the happiest and most terrifying day of my life. The doctors called it a miracle. 9 healthy babies, all thriving, all ready to come home. For me, it marked the beginning of the end game. The ticking clock grew louder. As long as they were in the hospital, under the watchful eyes of nurses like Mary, they were relatively safe. Bringing them into Mark's house felt like leading lambs into a lion's den. Mark, ever the master of public relations, orchestrated their homecoming like a media event. He hired a fleet of cars and professional nannies. He allowed a local news crew to film a short saccharine segment about the Collins 9, casting himself as the proud, slightly overwhelmed father of a miracle brood. I stood beside him, smiling for the cameras, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I played my part perfectly, the adoring wife, the grateful mother. Inside, I was screaming. NTHE Mansion was transformed. A whole wing was converted into a state-of-the-art nursery, complete with 9 cribs, 9 changing tables, and a team of round-the-clock nurses. Mark had spared no expense, but it wasn't for the babies, comfort, or for mine. It was for his image. The nursery was a stage, and we were all actors in his play. He rarely entered it. When he did, he would stand by the door, his gaze sweeping over the cribs with the detached air of a landlord inspecting his property. He never held them. He never spoke to them. To him, they were still just a collection of failures. NMY life became a carefully orchestrated routine. I spent every waking moment with my daughters, a fierce protective shield around them. I learned their individual cries, the unique shape of their tiny hands, the different ways they slept. My love for them was a physical force, a burning sun that eclipsed everything else. But beneath that love, the cold, hard machinery of my plan continued to turn. NMY's secret alliance with Jessica and Rosa grew stronger. Rosa would create distractions, sending Mark on errands or inventing household emergencies that would get him out of the house for a few precious hours. During that time, I worked with a feverish intensity. With Jessica's guidance over burner phones that Rosa smuggled in, I learned how to use my old laptop to access Mark's digital life. I found it. The hidden accounts, the shell corporations, the proof that he had been siphoning millions from his family's company for years, hiding it away for a future that clearly didn't include me or our daughters. I downloaded everything onto a small, encrypted flash drive, a tiny piece of plastic that held the power to destroy him. NBUT. Jessica warned me that financial crimes might not be enough. He's rich, Sarah. He can hire lawyers to tie this up in court for years. We need something more. We need proof of his character, something that will turn the public, and more importantly, his family, against him completely. NTHE opportunity came in a way I never expected. Mark's father, a stern, imposing patriarch named Arthur Collins, had been watching the situation with a quiet, discerning eye. He was a man from an older generation, a man who valued family and legacy above all else. He had been thrilled by the news of 9 grandchildren, regardless of their gender. Mark's coldness toward them had not gone unnoticed. One evening, Arthur came to the house unannounced. Mark was out at a business dinner. Arthur found me in the nursery, rocking 2 of my daughters to sleep. He didn't say anything for a long time, just watched me, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice raspy with age. He doesn't see them, does he? He looks, but he doesn't see. Tears welled in my eyes. It was the first time anyone in his family had acknowledged my pain. I took a risk. I decided to trust my gut. He sees them as a disappointment, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He wanted a son, an heir. Arthur's jaw tightened. My son is a fool. A legacy is not built on gender. It's built on character, on love. He looked at the babies in my arms, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of warmth in his stern eyes. NTHAT night. I made a decision. I had one more piece of evidence to collect, the most dangerous and damning of all. I used some of the money Rosa had helped me squirrel away to buy a tiny, high-quality audio recorder. I knew Mark's temper. I knew his cruelty. I just needed the world to hear it. I started carrying the recorder with me at all times, hidden in my pocket, waiting for the moment when his mask would slip completely. I didn't have to wait long. The pressure was getting to him, and his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. And the final betrayal NTHE breaking point came on the girl's first birthday. It should have been a day of celebration, a milestone marking a year of impossible survival and growth. I had planned a small private party, just me, the girls, and Rosa. But Mark had other ideas. He saw it as another PR opportunity, a chance to reinforce the narrative of the happy miracle family. He invited business partners, society friends, and his parents. The mansion was filled with people who smiled at me with pity in their eyes and cooed over the babies as if they were a novelty exhibit. Throughout the day, I could feel Mark's anger simmering just beneath the surface. He was performing, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, but his smiles were brittle, his eyes cold. He was furious that he had to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of his greatest failure. NTHE party was winding down. The guests were leaving, and the nannies were putting the exhausted babies to bed. I was in the kitchen with Rosa cleaning up when Mark stormed in. He had been drinking heavily, and his face was flushed with alcohol and rage. He didn't know his father, Arthur, was in the adjoining study, the door slightly ajar. And he didn't know that the small audio recorder in my pocket was on. "Was that a good enough show for you?" he sneered, ripping off his tie. "Are you happy now? You got your party. You got to show off your litter." "They are not a litter, Mark," I said, my voice steady, my hand instinctively tightening around the recorder in my pocket. "They are our daughters." NHE laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "They are nothing. They are a drain on my resources and a stain on my name. I should have listened to my gut and forced you to get rid of them when I had the chance." NMY blood ran cold. He had said it. The words I knew he felt, but had never been foolish enough to say out loud. "You think I'm going to spend the rest of my life paying for your biological incompetence?" he continued, taking a step closer, his voice rising to a shout. I have been building a plan, Sarah, a real plan. I've been moving my assets, setting up a new life for myself, a life that doesn't include you or your 9 mistakes. Once the money is secure, I'm leaving, and you'll be left with nothing, you and them. You can see how far your mother's love gets you when you're on the street. And it was a confession, more damning than anything I had found on his laptop. He wasn't just a cruel husband and a negligent father. He was a thief, plotting to abandon his family and steal from his own father, and his father had heard every word. NTHE study door swung open. Arthur Collins stood there, his face pale, his body trembling with a rage that dwarfed his son's. You are no son of mine, he said, his voice shaking but powerful. You speak of legacy? You have disgraced the name of every ancestor who built this family. You are a thief and a coward. Mark froze, his face draining of all color. He spun around, his eyes wide with panic. Father, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Arthur said, his voice like ice. I have heard the truth from your own mouth. You are a disgrace. He turned his gaze to me, and for the first time, it was filled with something akin to an apology. Sarah, I am so sorry. I have been blind, but I am not blind anymore. NHE pulled out his phone and made a call. Get security over to my son's house immediately, and get my lawyers on the line, all of them. NNTHE, carefully constructed world of Mark Collins shattered in that instant. The final betrayal wasn't mine against him. It was his, against everyone who had ever trusted him. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. He finally saw me, not as his compliant wife, but as the architect of his downfall. He lunged for me, his hands outstretched, a final, desperate act of violence. You did this, he screamed, NBUT, before he could reach me. 2 security guards, summoned by his father, burst into the room and restrained him. He struggled, shouting my name, shouting curses, but it was over. The king had been dethroned in his own castle. I stood there, my hand still in my pocket, clutching the small device that had captured his confession. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt the quiet, profound relief of a long war finally coming to an end. And a legacy of love, NTHE aftermath, was swift and brutal. Arthur Collins, a man whose power and influence Mark had always taken for granted, moved with the precision of a seasoned general. Armed with my flash drive of financial evidence and the audio recording of Mark's confession, his lawyers dismantled his son's life piece by piece. The hidden accounts were frozen. The business partners were notified. The authorities were called. Mark was facing not just a messy divorce, but federal charges for fraud and embezzlement. His name, once a symbol of respectability, was now synonymous with scandal. NHE lost everything: the company, the inheritance, the respect of his family, and his freedom. The mansion, which had been my prison, was sold to cover his debts and legal fees. The last I heard, he was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, a man undone by his own greed and cruelty. Justice, it turned out, was not just a concept. It was a consequence. Arthur insisted that I and the girls were taken care of. He set up a trust fund for each of my daughters, not out of pity, but out of a genuine desire to right his son's wrongs. This is their birthright, he told me, his voice heavy with regret. A legacy of security, not of shame. And I didn't stay in that city with its painful memories. With the resources now at my disposal, I moved. I bought a large, comfortable house in a quiet town by the sea, a house with a big yard and lots of light. It wasn't a mansion, it was a home filled with the sound I had come to cherish above all others, the laughter of my 9 daughters. Life became a beautiful, chaotic, wonderful whirlwind. It was a life of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and endless questions. It was a life of braiding hair, packing lunches, and teaching 9 unique, brilliant little girls that their worth was not determined by anyone's expectations, but by the strength of their character and the kindness in their hearts. Rosa came with us. She became more than a housekeeper. She became family, a beloved auntie to my girls, my partner in the beautiful madness of raising 9 children. Mary, the nurse from the NICU, kept in touch, sending birthday cards every year, a constant reminder of the first ally who gave me hope. Jessica, the lawyer, became a dear friend, a woman who had not just fought for me legally, but had empowered me to fight for myself. Years passed. My daughters grew, each one a unique and vibrant thread in the beautiful tapestry of our family. Ava became a passionate artist, her canvases exploding with color. Bella, a gifted musician whose melodies could make you weep. Chloe, a fierce debater who dreamed of becoming a lawyer like Jessica. Each one of them a testament to the power of love over hate. Sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I think back to that day in the hospital. I remember the cold floor, the humiliation, the feeling of being dragged away from the most precious things in my life. I remember the man who called my blessings a curse. But the memory no longer holds any pain. It's just a scar, a reminder of a battle I fought and won. NMY legacy isn't a business empire or a family name etched on a building. My legacy is here, in this house, in the bright futures of my 9 daughters. It's in their laughter, their dreams, their unwavering belief in themselves. Mark wanted a son to carry on his name. I gave the world 9 women who will change it for the better. And I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my bones, that is a far greater legacy than he could have ever imagined. I didn't just survive, we thrived. And our story wasn't one of shame. It was one of love, resilience, and the quiet, unyielding power of a mother who refused to let the world tell her what her blessings were worth.